Stephen Bedard, and we are going to be talking about Revelation chapter 3, sort of, because I made a mistake in my previous video where I left out the fourth church of Revelation, Thyatira, which I think that I subconsciously left out because I was afraid I was going to mispronounce Thyatira. I left it out, and unfortunately, it's missing from that video, and now I have to include it in this one. So we are actually going to start this one with the end part of chapter 2, and then we will continue on to chapter 3. So now we're going to look at the church in Thyatira. And in this letter, there is some emphasis on Jesus as the Son of God, which would be considered a direct challenge to the imperial cult, the worship of the emperor. Many of them use the title Son of God. Augustus considered himself the Son of God. That's why the emperors would deify the emperor before them, not just because they had great love for that emperor, but so that they could describe themselves as the Son of God. So Augustus deified Julius Caesar, and therefore Augustus was the Son of God. And on it went with the emperors. There is also some belief that some of the talk of Jesus and his glowing appearance here may be in contrast to some of the sun gods of that area. Thinking specifically of Apollo and Helios. We're told here that this church was known for working hard, but there still is some criticism from Jesus, and that is that they tolerate compromise. And there's a reference to Jezebel, and this is very much like the earlier references to Balaam. And in the case of Balaam, Balaam was someone who encouraged the Hebrews to compromise their beliefs, and Jezebel, as the Old Testament wife of King Ahab, did the same thing, getting the Israelites to compromise their beliefs and to worship pagan gods. And so the belief is that there is pressure in the city and in this church for them to compromise, to, on one hand, follow Jesus, but on the other hand, to give in to some of the other religious impulses in the society around them. And this may be connected with the trade guilds that are not just like a modern labor union, but would require some kind of religious content as well. And because, of course, these Christians want to continue in their trades, but how did they do that with keeping faithful to Christ? And so that's one of the challenges that they have. There's also a reference here to the deep things of Satan, and these are likely some kind of secret revelations that people are experiencing, secret knowledge, perhaps connected somewhat with later concepts of Gnosticism. I'm not saying that there were actual Gnostics in this church, but Gnosticism is about having secret knowledge. And perhaps something like that is happening here. And they are receiving these revelations. So in many ways, we're seeing revelation versus revelation. The revelation of Jesus versus the revelation from Satan. And that is all we have for Thyatira. So we're going to get right into chapter 3. And here we have the church in Sardis. And this church had a large Jewish community, although in contrast to some of the other cities and churches that we've looked at, it seems as if the Christians and the Jews had a relatively good relationship in the city. There's not a lot of conflict, at least not that is reflected in this letter. This city had a great reputation, meaning when they looked at their past, they had a great name, they had an important place in history, but the city at this time wasn't that important. And there is a parallel there with the church, that they had a reputation for being alive, but they were really dead. We're told here that Jesus could come as a thief, and this is a very common description that is found. It's found in the Gospels. It's also found in 1 Thessalonians in reference to the second coming. And it is all about being ready, because we don't know when Jesus is coming back. There's also a reference to the Book of Life. In the Old Testament, the Book of Life generally is about just being alive. So if you are erased from the Book of Life, then you are dead. That's what it means. All those who are in the Book of Life are those who are alive. Those who are erased from the Book of Life are those who are dead. But by the time we get to the New Testament, there is a spiritual aspect to it as well. So it's not just about physical death, it's about spiritual death as well. And so there's a danger that they could experience spiritual death. And then we move to the church in Philadelphia. Here we are told that Jesus has the keys of David. Now, of course, Jesus, although the second person of the Trinity, he is also a son of David. In the incarnation, his human body, he is descended from David. And David was considered the greatest king of Israel. All other kings were compared to David. So he is the image of royalty. And Jesus has the keys to the palace. He is the one who determines who enters and who is not allowed to come in. And so that is a very important role. We see here that the Christians, again, are having some conflict with the Jews. And as we said in the previous video, this is not meant to be any kind of foundation for anti-Semitism. It is not saying that all Jews are satanic and they are terrible people or anything like that. Remember, it's likely that John, who is writing this, is himself Jewish in background, that many people, even at this late of a date, would still be Jewish in background in the Christian church. So it's not meant to be anti-Jewish at all. But like the church in Smyrna, there is some conflict with the Jews, as some of the followers of Jesus are being rejected by the local synagogue. There's a reference in chapter 3, verse 10 here about keeping from the time of trouble. And some people have looked at that and said that this is evidence of pre-tribulation rapture, because this is a promise that they will not have to go through the time of troubles. However, we need to be very careful with that, because this is being written specifically to the church in Philadelphia. It is not necessarily a promise to all of Christians. So if you're going to argue for a pre-tribulation rapture, you're going to have to look elsewhere. That's not really the place to find it. The encouragement for the church in Philadelphia is that they need to be overcomers. They need to fight through, to not give up, to not compromise. And then, of course, we have a preview here of the New Jerusalem, which we will get much more information about later on in this book. And this brings us to the church in Laodicea. And Jesus is referred to as the Amen. And you might wonder, how is that appropriate? Because isn't Amen just the way of saying, hey, I'm done my prayer now? It's like hitting send on an email. You say Amen and off it goes to God. Well, that's actually not what Amen means. It's a Hebrew word, and it is a reference to truth. It's a confirmation of what is being said. When Jesus in the gospel says, truly, truly, I say to you, he's actually saying, amen, amen, I say to you. So Jesus is the amen. He is the one who is true in what he is saying, that we can trust his words completely. There is an interesting reference here to water, and that Jesus would wish that they would be either cold or hot. but instead they are lukewarm, and he wants to spit them out of their mouth. I remember when I read this for the first time, I thought, well, that's not really good. I can see how we want people to be hot in their faith, but we definitely don't want people to be cold in their faith. And lukewarm, well, that's not as good as being hot in your faith, but it is better than being cold. So what is going on here? But that is not really the way to interpret this. We have to look at the historical background. So Laodicea did not have its own water supply. It had to be brought in from outside. And so there were stone barrel pipes that brought in the water. And the water that would come, it would begin cold, and it would make its way to Laodicea. But by the time that it got to the city, it was lukewarm. And the same thing would happen if they tried to send through that pipe hot water from hot springs. By the time it would get to the city, it would be lukewarm. And if you think about it, there's a lot of use for cold water. There's a lot of use for hot water. Cold water is great on a hot day. It's very refreshing. Hot water is great for bathing and for other uses as well. But lukewarm water, if you've ever had a mouthful of lukewarm water, it just really does not do much for you. In fact, you want to do what Jesus says here and spew it out of your mouth. You want to spit it out. And that is how he is responding to their faith. They're neither hot nor cold. They have compromised in such a way that he just wants to spit them right out of their mouth. They are known to have wealth, but he challenges them on what true wealth is about. And this actually fits very well with the teachings of Jesus in the Gospels, in that he is not impressed with how much money one has in the bank, but we are to look for what is true wealth. And then the other passage that is really important here is a reference to Jesus standing at the door and knocking. And this verse has been used in countless evangelistic sermons as the evangelist or the pastor is up there preaching away, trying to get people to come to Jesus, and pleads with them that Jesus is knocking at the door. Just open up the door, let Jesus in, and welcome him. And yet we have to realize that what Jesus is saying here is not for non-Christians to open the door of their heart to Jesus, but for Christians to open the door of their heart to Jesus. And that is a big challenge for us. Of course, you can use this image when you're speaking to non-Christians. Of course, we want non-Christians to open the door of their heart to Jesus. And Jesus does want to come in and to fellowship. But in the original context, this is referring to Christians. And this is a major challenge to us today, that we think that just because we have prayed a certain prayer or have been baptized or have held membership in a local church, that we're all good. We have passed all the tests, and so there's nothing that is needed. There is regular need for letting Jesus in, and for him to come in and to have fellowship, to sup with us, to have a meal with us in a spiritual sense. And so that brings us to the end of the 7 churches of Revelation, or at least I sure hope so. I think I've finally got it. After missing that one in the previous video, I think we've gotten to all 7. And what I really want for you as we go forward in this series on Revelation is that you remember that first and foremost, all of these revelations are given to these 7 churches. Of course, we receive something from it. There is something here for us. But if we take the posture that this revelation is specifically being written for the 21st century church, and previous generations are just observing what we get to experience, we are making a mistake. Rather, this is being written primarily to the first century church and 7 congregations within the first century church, and that we get to observe what Jesus is saying to them, and we get to piggyback on the blessing they receive from this revelation. So I hope that that is helpful, and in the next video in the series, we'll get a little bit deeper into the revelation of Jesus Christ. Thank you for watching the video. Please come and visit me at my website, stephenjbedard.com, and God bless.